Many integrators have no idea just how much project management time it takes to properly implement and manage one of these luxury lighting systems. I think I had a room of over 100 people, and I asked them how many have done one of these systems start to finish. And there was maybe 3 of them in the room that had completed one.
Welcome to the Flywheel Effect, the podcast where ambition meets expertise in the world of luxury home services. Whether you're an entrepreneur, a small business owner, or a forward-thinking professional, this is your platform for growth, profit, and prosperity. Each episode, we dive deep into how to leverage data for smarter business decisions and share insights that help you transition from technician to visionary. Let's jump in.
All right. Welcome to the Flywheel Effect, our first episode of this great podcast with myself, Brent Sonnek-Schmelz, and my partner here, Matt Bernath, of Vital LLC, your growth partner in the luxury home services industry. Kicking off this first episode, we're going to do a little recap of Lightapalooza. Matt, what do you feel happened at Lightapalooza this year? Well, actually, first, I think let's give everyone a little heads up on what Lightapalooza actually is.
Yeah, great. So Lightapalooza is a trade show essentially for the custom lighting world. And so it's been around, I think, this was the 3rd year, although with COVID,
Yeah, I think the third.
There were some skips. But it's a really innovative concept because it brings together a bunch of different lighting brands. So on the trade show floor, there are brands showing their latest goods, really around custom luxury lighting for luxury homes, but also the most educational content of really any trade show in the luxury home services industry. So I don't remember the exact number, but it was thousands of hours and seats of education. I think that spanned 4 days of back-to-back education following
but not just technical education, right?
Yeah, following 4 different tracks. So I think there was certifications, there were lighting technical trainings, manufacturer trainings, and then business tracks, which is what I was involved in.
Yeah, for me, it's like, hey, Lightapalooza is great. I'm not really that interested in the technology. What I'm really interested in, and I think what you are too, is how this luxury home industry is changing around the business and thinking about how they're going to grow. So what were you doing at Lightapalooza, and what were your findings?
So I was there for a couple of reasons. We have a number of our Vital members that participated in that event and were attendees. So it was great to be around them and really for us it was learning. There's a ton of takeaways for me about really understanding the mechanics of the business side of adding the luxury lighting category to these custom integration businesses. So custom integration businesses are normally used to selling audio, video, some shading, control systems, and really luxury technology throughout the home. But this category of luxury lighting is so adjacent to what we do as technology integrators. It was interesting to me to understand the business side of that model. And so I wanted to network and really learn more about that. So part of that was me presenting on 2 topics where I had to meet with subject matter experts and interview them and understand at a grassroots level what it means to add the category and what that looks like for these custom integration businesses. And so I was presenting 2 sessions around that. And then I also facilitated panel discussions on a couple of other related topics.
Yeah. One of your panels, Matt, if I'm not mistaken, is really about how to grow, whether you're partnering, whether you're going to start a new office, whether you're going to buy somebody else. And I think you were a little surprised at the lack of experience, right? In those types of, in those growth attributes.
Yeah, in some ways. So, as I was suggesting topics for these sessions to the owners of the show, and I said, hey, one of the topics that comes up frequently as we work with our custom integrator members at Vital is, should I buy an electrical contractor? Should I partner with an electrical contractor? Or should I grow my electrical contracting business organically through my company? Because most of these custom integration businesses don't currently do high voltage electrical work. But I think they recognize that in order to add on the category of lighting, they need to have electrical services as a component of their business model. So they're figuring out which way to go: buy, build, or partner. And so one of the sessions that we put together was just that. Let's talk about what option is best for you, the custom integrator, and unpack with other integrators what that looks like. And as I tried to put that panel together with, a panel of experts, I found that there's very little experience in our industry of the, purchasing and building. So there are more integrators who have built electrical services as an add-on component, but not as many that have purchased an electrical contractor. And of course, many of them are doing the partnering thing. So it went from being a panel discussion to really myself and Aaron Cowden from Fusion in South Carolina. He and I essentially moderated a roundtable discussion. So it went from a panel discussion to a roundtable. And it was very interesting because there were a ton of opinions, but not many true examples of success.
Yeah, I think when I think of success in that, I think of Amanda Wildman, right? I think she's done a great job in her system as an electrical contractor, and she uses that as a real differentiator in her market. And I think that's the key, right? You can be differentiated by adding a service like that maybe you wouldn't want to otherwise. But with lighting, but actually it's not just lighting, right? Like when I look at Lightapalooza, it's the Lightapalooza, Shadapalooza, and Powerpalooza all wrapped up into one, all of which take power, electrical issues a little differently than AV. But really, there's such an opportunity for growth if you focus on these really, really high value add opportunities, but they're hard, right? And they're scary. And I think what you encountered is people are scared of this. And I did, for sure.
Yes. I think they're recognizing that partnering with electricians is the current gap to cover, right? So it's getting them where they need to go, but they recognize that they can't manage the quality, the outcomes quite as well because it's not their business. So many of the integrators want to bring this electrical service in-house, and for them, it's less risky to grow it organically than to go buy an electrical contractor. Although there are some big upsides in purchasing the right electrical contractor, they feel it's less risky to do it on their own. The downside to that is, you have a pretty significant upfront cost that you have to overcome and a fairly large learning curve. So in one way, it might feel less risky for them, but they're ultimately paying the price in the time span that it takes to become successful in that role.
Yeah, I like to think in like trends. And when I think back to when I kind of first looked at this industry, which was like a long time ago, like 1999, it was very much an AV industry at that point, right? And plasmas had just come out. And all these integrators, and they weren't really called integrators back then, right? They were just like AV installer guys, TV guys, is they were happy to sell tons of flat screens, plasmas for 5-10 grand, make huge margins, put in some speakers and move on, right? Like that. That's what it was: is sell TVs, sell some other AV, and move on. And then the TVs ended up being commoditized. They lost their ability to make any money. They had to move into something else, and so that was a big shift. They moved into more into control, right? And that was programming. Everyone had like hardcore programming to get anything control, even think about working. So they had some high margin in that. That started now. That's been a long trend, and there's been more and more control, and it's got more commoditized, actually, not making as much money. And now, where do you make your money? It's in these new products and services that add real interesting value to a home, around lighting, shades, because it's ambiance, and really shades is all about lighting, right? Because you're changing out external light versus internal light. And then the power. Did you get a chance to think about power at all? Because I think that's actually, of the three areas that I saw at the show, probably the most interesting to me.
Yeah, I didn't touch much on the power side, but I do want to address some of what you just said. So it's interesting the
Yep.
way that you look at it from the business side, right? Because you're a business person, I'm a business person, and we look at it as margin and revenue and all that stuff. What I find interesting, and there are exceptions to this, but I think broadly across the industry, the choice to move from, as you said, flat panel TVs as a margin center to control systems as a margin center to lighting or power as a margin center, margins and revenue have not necessarily been the driver across the industry broadly.
Right.
When we as business people look at it, we think of it that way, but I think broadly that wasn't the reason for the transition. I think a lot of it has to do with the cool factor, especially the control.
Yep.
And so as much as we would love as business people for them to have been thinking about it from a margin perspective, commoditization and, hey, what's the next thing and where's our growth going to come from? It's funny that, again, the industry is, I would say broadly, doesn't look at it that way. But the
That's a
technology
great point.
yeah, the technology has been very interesting, right? Like they go after the cool factor. And I think the cool factor in the lighting has been, I mean, the shades for sure, because that's been around a little longer than lighting in the custom integration world. Shades, the cool factor was, hey, these things go up and down pretty silently. And, there's a cool factor there. Of course, they can go up and down with the sun. Those sorts of things I think are a draw. It seems like the cool factor in lighting lately that has really drawn in our industry is the ability to control them in terms of the color temperature, circadian rhythms. And I think that's really, as much as I'd love to say our integrators are business people looking for the next business opportunity, in many cases is driven by, hey, this is cool, or they have a leading edge builder or interior designer who's asking them about it and saying, hey, I don't think my electrician understands the level of control that you guys do. I heard about this tunable lighting. Is that something you guys do? And broadly, I think that's what's driving the change versus the business side. My opinion, anyway.
No, I think that's a fair point. So where I try to think of where's the profitable as the leading indicator, it's ultimately the trailing indicator, but still ends up driving decisions, right? Like none of these guys want to sell anything less. Nobody wants to sell anything less than, 50, 60 points, on certain channels, on obviously on networking, they'll take significantly less. But ultimately, the most successful ones understand that the two need to go hand in hand. Right?
Yes, absolutely. And I think what's interesting about that is the margin discussion, I believe, happens at the vendor side as they're having these communications with the dealer. Many dealers probably wouldn't even bother being that concerned.
Right. No, it's interesting. But, hey, plasmas is a little different because I think that change where they weren't ready for it because they were focused on the cool factor, as opposed to that all of a sudden they started being for sale for $300 at Best Buy, right? And so they couldn't compete on price at all, and were forced to make a change because of margin pressures too, right?
Absolutely.
On the power side, I know you didn't get a chance to look at it. Here's what I went to a couple of the sessions on power. And what I found interesting is, one, there was a lot of fear, right? And the fear from the integrators was, hey, I'm not an expert in this yet. I'm afraid that if something goes wrong with the power, that I'm going to get blamed for it. And what the panel made very clear is what's going to happen when power goes bad is something electronic is going to go bad. Regardless of whether or not the power is the issue, you're going to get blamed for it because of these electronics. So you might as well get ahead of it and make sure that they're getting clean power so that there's fewer problems that you get blamed for anyway, as opposed to worrying about the power problems, because really it's all about electronic problems. So just start doing it. And it seemed like that resonated with a couple of integrators, but there still was a huge amount of pushback. The powers when you're having 5,000, you can have, thousands of, if you count all the lights, right? Thousands of devices in a home that go bad with bad power. And apparently the power coming off the grid is terrible on its own. So power is really like backups and conditioning. I'm really surprised that integrators haven't tried to get a hold of power more, given the effect it can have on the electronics in the house, especially because they can drive tremendous profit and recurring revenue off of it.
Yeah, it is interesting. It I think it has some parallels in the control side. So what, as you were explaining your takeaway on, hey, you guys are going to get blamed for this anyway, it reminds me of the controls conversation. So as LED lighting kind of first came out and became popular, there were tons of issues dimming and controlling these LED lights with, at the time, the control systems are available. And the integrator would get blamed for that, right? So the integrator would sell a high-end lighting control system, which adds a ton of value in a lot of different ways. And then the electrician would choose whatever cam lights were on sale that week. And the dimming characteristics were terrible. And of course, the homeowner or the contractor, whoever, would just come back and say, hey, your control system's broken. When the reality, come to find out now 5 or 10 years later, it's probably been more like 5. Yeah, it's probably been 10 years later, that it was it was crappy lighting that was the problem. It wasn't the control system, right? And of course the control systems have improved since then as well. But I think that was one of the drivers early on for integrators to get into doing their own lighting fixtures, because now they become a single source of truth. I'm going to sell you the fixture and I'm going to sell you the control system. And by the way, I've tested them together. They're going to work. I think that's your point with the electrical is, hey, you guys could get ahead of this by making sure that you're providing incredible quality electrical throughout the home. And, the technology components are going to last longer, right?
Yeah. I mean, the 100%, that's exactly what they're seeing. But I think out of the room, there were maybe, I don't know, 50, 60 integrators. When asked how many people were doing power, maybe 2 or 3 raised their hands, right? And you talk to the vendors on the power side, and they're like, yeah, it's a hard sell for us, but we're going to keep at it because we know eventually they'll come around. It's just getting them over the hump. And then I think it actually becomes really interesting. And then the whole question of, are you going to be an electrical contractor if you do lighting and you do power integration and you're doing grid connection, figuring out battery backup, potentially secondary backup, whether it's gas, solar, whatever, you've just also tripled your job, right? Now you're not talking you're talking a $500,000 job easy, right?
Yeah.
So and profitable all the way through without too much additional time, because there's a lot of hardware components that go into it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting from the business side. What do you think is driving their fear to take that on, from the integrator side?
From a couple of people I spoke to and what I was listening to the presentations, it was one of the big things is actually a fear of selling it, right? Where they feel like they're bidding on a job against somebody else, and now their pricing feels out of whack because they just went from 100,000 to 200,000 with this whole power plan, and they feel like they're going to lose the bid. Like, that was actually a big part of what I'm hearing. Second is just unfamiliarity with the long-term consequences of doing this install, which is so radically different from what they feel that they are doing, right? Running PoE and speaker cable and connecting a rack room is understood. Running a large battery backup with a grid connect and a power conditioner plus an inverter and everything else feels different, even though none of their stuff that they want to install can work without good power. Right? You look at places like Surgex and Wattbox; they've been crushing it, but it needs to be more than that. And so I don't know. Those are the two areas that I heard the most. Is on and it's interesting. The fear of the sale is kind of self-fulfilling, right? Like, if you're afraid to sell something, it kind of comes out when you're trying to talk about it. But if you're confident in the value, and I think what it is a fear that you're not providing value with that. but the value is overwhelming that they
Yeah.
should have no fear. And like if I'm doing a $500,000 install in my house, and it explains to me someone connects a sensor into my power and sees it spiking, bouncing all over the place, and says, "Yeah, this is going to crush every single one of your electronic components over time." I'm going to spend the money and put in good power, right? Like it's actually a pretty easy sale, but there's a lot of hesitancy around it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I wonder if any of them have considered that simply introducing people to new technologies adds a ton of confidence in the whole sales process anyway. And that not everybody's going to be a buyer, especially early on, but you will get zero buyers if you're not offering it to everyone. Right. And so it really
Right.
comes down to, I know when I had my integration company, one of my biggest fears was actually somebody learning about a technology from another person that I'd never
Mm-hmm.
introduced them to, because I felt like it was my job to introduce them to all of the technologies and let them choose. Hey, if this is for you, great. If it's not for you, I don't care. But if I don't introduce you to it, I've done you a disservice. I think that that's, some potential mindset shift that needs to happen with integrators. Is they're the technology concierge. They need to be introducing all the technology. Whether they sell it or not is not of consequence.
Yeah, and I think something that I think we've spoken about in the past is there's a general sense there's making decisions on whether to do or not to do something based on fear, and rarely is that the right reason to take an action or not take an action. You
Mm-hmm.
know, um, find out what the highest value opportunity is for your customer, offer those, and see what happens, but don't be afraid that of the unknown in this case, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish I could remember give credit to the article or the book or something, but I read somewhere that love and fear are in competition, right? That wherever you have love, you can't have fear, and wherever you have fear, you can't have love. It's usually some percentage, right? You rarely have 100% of one or 100% of the other. But recognizing that especially in our decision-making process, if we can move towards love and away from fear, that usually makes it, for a decision. In this case, if we're approaching our client relationships with more love, and it's like, hey, I feel a responsibility to you to share these things with you. Yes, it
Mm-hmm.
will benefit my business if you buy them, but if you don't buy them, no problem. At least I've loved up on you, right? Versus saying, hey, I'm really scared about offering this to you because you might say no, or worst case, you might think I'm just trying to sell you a bunch of stuff, right? It's like, I think it's all in the approach.
Yeah, I think that's right. I also find it interesting that there's two comments that you hear from people, right? Is they're afraid of losing a sale. Like we're talking about this, they don't want to offer it.
Yeah.
On the other side, people claim that their pipeline's completely full, right? And if your pipeline's completely full, you should try to offer everything to everybody because it's okay if people say no,
Right.
right? Got to feel which way's the right way for you. And I think if your pipeline's full, just be as aggressive as you can in making sure that you're offering the best quality and value to everyone you come in contact with.
Mm-hmm.
And any other takeaways from Lightapalooza, Matt?
I think the biggest takeaway for me was actually a pretty significant one. And it's the fact that many integrators have no idea just how much project management time it takes to properly implement and manage one of these luxury lighting systems. Whether they're doing the high voltage work or not, it's a significant amount of time. And there's a very small percentage. I think I had a room of over 100 people, and I asked them how many have done one of these systems start to finish. And what I asked about was a fully tunable lighting system, which is a really complex system. And there was maybe 3 of them in the room that had done, had completed one. And, there were many people who were in different stages, but these are long time span jobs. So what that tells me is that they don't really understand what it takes to do a full commissioning. And the great thing about our industry is, by and large, these integrators will just do what it takes to get the job done well. There's very few integrators who will walk away from a project because they miscalculated something. But the downside to that is they are losing their butt on the labor side. And
Right.
many of them are trying to solve for that by just charging more project management, but they're still looking at it as a fixed fee, which doesn't really work because they have no concept of how much it's going to take to finish these systems, especially a fully tunable lighting system, which has 5 different channels of tuning. And you have to bounce that off of customers' taste. And you just have no idea how long that's going to take, how many levels of customization the customers want. So that was my biggest takeaway.
Are you, one thing I'm thinking about when you're saying that is are these guys now getting into the homes at the architect level, pre-built into the plan? So that's also a huge change for them as well, right? Now they're had to get involved much, much earlier and make sure that all the drawings and designs are right. And they're going to be providing support to that architect on that layout and schematics, right?
Yep.
And
yep.
That's huge.
And that's actually good for everybody. It's good for the homeowner. It's good for the designer. It's good for the architect. It's actually good for everybody, because the great news is the custom integrators and custom integration industry is being supported by some very high quality lighting design companies. And so getting them in early is benefiting everyone. But you're right. They aren't used to getting in that early. Right. And so it's more time. It's more meetings, it's more phone calls. It's a lot more admin overhead that looks very different from their traditional sales process.
Right. And I'm assuming they're not accounting for that time properly, as you're saying. Not just on the technician side, but on the admin side.
Today they're not. I think eventually they will. And again, for the end user or the general contractor or the architect, this is good news, because now they have someone else to rely on. They have an expert to rely on versus, and I don't want to talk bad about electricians broadly, but many of them just aren't that interested in the high technology lighting piece. And so now, everybody can have this expert to rely on. That's good. It's just going to cost money. And, I think it's important that integrators recognize they have to charge for those services because they're providing high value.
What's the number one recommendation that you would make to the integrators that are getting in and attempting to grow their lighting business?
Take it slow, become an expert, education, partner with somebody in a different market who's done projects, maybe go out and see some of their projects. And then also move to a retainer-based design and project management service versus trying to do it as a fixed fee, because as a fixed fee, you're going to let yourself down and you're actually going to let your customers down, because once you've burned all your hours, you're going to be very stingy with your time. And that's not fair to anybody.
Right. That's great. I think that's, there's a lot of things. There's going to be a lot of changes during the course of this project that you cannot account for up front.
Right. And again, I can't emphasize enough that our integrators, by and large in the industry, they're not going to let anybody down, but they'll take it in the shorts over and over and over again before they let their customer down, which again, that's good news. There are exceptions to that, but I just hate to see them take it in the shorts when they can be running a better business and making everybody happy.
Cool. Well, this has been a great conversation, Matt. I've really enjoyed talking about our Lightapalooza experience. Obviously, we're looking at this a little differently than just about the technology. There's a lot of moving parts, and I'm excited to see where it goes from here.
Absolutely.
Well, yep. Thank you everyone for the listen, and we're looking forward to seeing you soon and hearing from you as well.
Thanks, Brent.
Thanks, Matt. Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in to the Flywheel Effect. Our journey through the intricate world of luxury home services continues to be fueled by your passion for excellence and innovation. If you found value in our conversations today, don't forget to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. More insights and resources. Visit us online at growwithvital.com. Until next time.